Us and joining us now, Doug Kelly, the CEO of the American Edge Project. Good morning, Doug. Thanks for coming on Middays.
Hey, good morning. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so this is an interesting topic, and it deals with this move in this country and under consideration by the Congress to implement antitrust legislation that would affect the technology industry. So tell us what you know about that and what your organization is doing with respect to that.
Yeah, sure. My organization is called the American Edge Project, and we're a coalition of 24 different groups that believes that technology gives us our global edge in national security and the economy. And technology is also critical for advancing democratic values across the globe. I mean, you're seeing that play out right now with the Russia situation in Ukraine, as well as what China is trying to do with its global ambitions. So technology is really critical, and the danger is that Congress right now is considering antitrust legislation that would do three fundamentally bad things. First, it would break up some of the big tech companies. It would restrict how they compete, who they can compete with, and it would also limit acquisitions that these companies can make. And all that would do is advantage China and other authoritarian governments to be able to swoop in and get those high-performing companies that may have breakthrough technologies.
You know, Doug, it's just as a practical and general concern, and being one that came from the technology industry, it just seems like every time government wants to insert itself into the market like this, especially one where most of our innovation, if not all of it, is sort of emits from this, even regardless of the industry and the industry sector and the segment. It all kind of starts with what comes out of this industry. They then apply those as tools to make their products and services better. And that's what powers this economy. That's what advances it. But get to my point. My concern is when government gets involved and thinks, well, we got to protect people from these organizations, these entities, this industry. They always screw it up and make it worse, just as a practical matter. They don't really protect. In fact, they end up hurting us is what happens.
Yeah, your point about the importance of deregulation versus regulation is right on point. I mean, let's just take a look at technology's impact in Mississippi, right? Technology-related entities have about a $4 billion a year impact in Mississippi. That's huge overall. And there's 3,000 technology-related businesses in your state alone. So holy cow, right there, that's a lot of stakeholders in Mississippi. So when you look at the problems of what these bills in Congress would do, they kind of fall in three major buckets, right? The first, let's just look at a global point of view. It would hurt our national security, and it benefits our adversaries, right? China's goal from the start has been we want to exceed the U.S. as a global power by the year 2035. And they see technology as the way to do that. A lot of these bills apply only to U.S. technology companies and not to China's technology companies. The second problem is that these anti-innovation bills would fundamentally damage our economy, especially small businesses, especially startups as well. And lastly, these bills are bad for consumers, right? So technology right now gives a lot of free or low-cost services to people. I'm in the order of about $1,500 a year per person. Well, one study showed that the impact of these bills would be about a $300 billion cost to these companies. Well, consumers and small businesses are going to pay that cost. So the idea of having a $300 billion tech tax on free or low-cost services that people use right now to really get ahead, to really generate wealth, to connect small business with consumers, that doesn't make sense at all.
Yeah, and I think it's fair to say, Doug, that the technology in general is an industry where truly someone can just hatch an idea and form a company in their garage. Many of our leading technology companies in the world, that's how they all started, with somebody's idea. And just that kind of came to fruition in the way of some product or service, and then they developed into these giant companies. And that opportunity still exists, thank God, in this country. We haven't even come close to exhausting the possibilities there. But when government gets involved and they promulgate this myriad of regulations, the individual innovator can't meander through all that. They can't navigate it. They can't create products and services to serve society.
Gerard, you're right on the money when you talk about the importance of technology for these startups to turn into big businesses. But I'll also give you about 10,000 examples of the importance of technology to small startup businesses that may only have 3 or 4 employees, right?
Sure, absolutely.
92% of startup businesses use Gmail, free Gmail,
Yeah,
as its
exactly.
email platform, right? So technology, these free and low cost services reduce the cost of creating a business, that help it increase efficiencies. And as one who started my own business twice, there's the more you can minimize your startup costs, the better off you're going to be, so your idea can become a reality. And so these tools matter to people overall, not just on the individual level, but also collectively up to our national security. And I'll tell you, there's no better example of what our tech companies do to fight authoritarianism than right now against Russia. Right? They're taking away the propaganda that the Russian government's trying to do inside Ukraine and inside of Russia. Google's blocking some of its map features, so the Russian army can't use them to find people. There's a whole host of other things that American tech companies look. At the end of the day, they got some flaws and things. They don't always get it right. But on this case, I'd rather depend on an American company to say, hey, we're going to draw the line here on what you can and can't do, foreign government, than say to be dependent on a Chinese company that's state controlled to help deliver that same message overall.
And Doug, is it not true that this is a chief export, for this country? This is where almost all of it originates. It was one of the first executive orders by Joe Biden last week to prohibit the export of much of our technology into Russia. This is where it all comes from. You just talked about Google as an example. There's no equivalent to that from a mapping perspective that the Russian military and government's using. It all starts here. Well, there's a reason why it starts here. And my fear is that what government's going to try to do is eliminate that environment and crush that environment, which has been the springboard for all of this technology.
So you're exactly right. So your state has some great innovation hubs there. And innovation hubs come about when you have great ideas funded with money that gets behind it and smart leaders in the community. But the foundation of all of that is, do you have a federal regulatory and legal system that encourages those forces to come together to generate good returns, to be innovation successes? And what Congress is talking about doing is fundamentally changing that foundation of our innovation economy. And if you do that, there are a lot of unintended consequences that are going to be happening. I can assure you, I'm from the state of Michigan, and my home county is a small manufacturing county. When Congress changed a lot of laws that shipped our manufacturing base overseas, they had no idea it would result in 5 million U.S. manufacturing jobs lost, or 43% lost in my hometown. And let me just tell you, we can't do the same thing with technology. We have to protect what we value. And technology isn't just another sector. It is the backbone of our national security, our economy, and our values. And Congress has got to protect it and nurture it and not damage it and punish it.
Thank you for what you do there, Doug. Your statements are well received, and I agree with you. One final thing I'll get you to comment on. The government can't keep up with the pace of technology. And so in trying to implement a regulatory framework, they're so dang far behind, and that drags innovation behind. It thwarts it.
You're right. I mean, at the end of the day, let the innovators innovate. Give them the runway to do the things that they do best, and let government help incentivize that. Right? I mean, we need to be able to bring onto our shores much more semiconductor manufacturing and other stuff that's been outsourced overseas. Congress can help create incentives to do that, and then have more investment here so we don't have overseas supply chains. That's the best thing that Congress can do, is let technology flourish and invest in the innovators and invest in our technology sector.
Totally agree. And I'll just make a final statement. What a lot of people want to see is kind of a breakdown of all these tech oligarchs, and all this regulatory framework's going to do is create more of them. That's exactly what will happen. It plays right into their hands every time.
Well, I'll tell you, one thing your listeners can do if they're as concerned about the dangers to tech as I am, they can call their senator or their congressman and say, hey, we're concerned about this. Don't do this. And they'll listen.
Got it. Appreciate it, Doug. Enjoyed the conversation. Thank you, sir. We'll talk.